Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Maqbool with you at Pitafi World. In today's show, we're going to take a look at the economy of Pakistan and the developing direction that it's going towards, and of course, what sort of measures need to be taken in to make sure that we're progressing towards a better future. Of course, this aspect has troubled Pakistan for quite some time now, particularly in the recent years or so, and with a lot of political instability in the country as well, and with the elections in this year as well, there was a lot of concern in terms of how we're going to proceed. Also, with regards to the IMF and post the standby arrangement, there is of course a lot of discussion going on as to what will be the future with the IMF for another extended fund facility, and what exactly will be the course that Pakistan is going to take, with of course the budget also something very important that is going to come later in this year. So we're going to be taking a look at where we stand today in terms of the economy of Pakistan and try to understand what is being done in this regard in terms of the kind of policies and measures that need to be taken at the government's level. For this, of course, last year we know that the SIFC was formed to ensure that there is a one-window solution to investors in the country, bringing in more foreign direct investment in the country and moving towards a better future in the relevant fields that have been outlined within the SIFC to encourage growth and investment in particular sectors, particularly coming in from the GCC countries and others as well. And for this, a number of committees have been formed as part of the SIFC, for which, of course, there is going to be a lot of strategy involved as to how this is going to take course. And a lot of promises, of course, have also been made with regards to investment coming in from different countries. How successful has the SIFC been for about 9 months since its formation is something that we're also going to be talking about today, and what aspects need to be considered, particularly in its objectives of taking away the hurdles of a bureaucracy, taking away any sort of hindrances that come in the way of investors thinking of coming in the country, and encouraging more to do so. So we're going to be taking a look at all of this in our show today and discussing at length what needs to be done to progress economically in Pakistan. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analyst Farrukh Pitafi and Raja Faisal, and we've also been joined online by senior economist Dr. KHAQAN. NAJEEB, thank you very much, Dr. KHAQAN, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. You're a regular at our show, and today's discussion is something that we really want your insight on. If we take a look back at where we stand from today to the previous year or so, since we've been involved with the standby arrangement with the IMF, since we of course have had the SIFC into formation, and now post-elections in Pakistan, and the fact that we're closing in with the standby arrangement and moving ahead with another extended fund facility with the IMF. Where do you see currently Pakistan has been, and whether or not we have actually progressed in terms of the kind of conditions that we were in same time last year?
So, Sana, if we look at Pakistan's progress over the last 8 to 10 months, one thing that is quite obvious is that Pakistan's typically behaved as one country would when they enter the IMF arrangement. In June, our reserves were at about 3 billion or $3.9 billion. Our rupee was gyrating, inflation was rising. So typically, when you bring in a program with the IMF, what happens is that three things in terms of macroeconomic stability start to come in. Number one, inflation starts to taper. So if you see our inflation at about 38% a few months back, today we are, hovering around 21% as the latest data shows us. Number two, what you see is that there is some semblance in the external sector. So if you see the first 8-month data, our current account is now about $1 billion in deficit. Same period last year, our current account was in deficit nearly $3.8 billion. So both these things, you also see that the rupee has behaved much better in terms of, it's actually hovering around 2,878 today, which is, there is consolidation, but there is also more stability as you see on the rupee. So this is typically how countries behave when they enter an IMF arrangement, and Pakistan has behaved like that. This is kind of a tailwind for the incoming government. There is certain macro stability. And lastly, also the reserves have been built up from under $4 billion to nearly $8 billion. And we are in a comfortable position in April to pay the Pakistan bond, which is due sometime early April, and we should be able to comfortably do that and also complete the standby arrangement as Pakistan, with a delay, is starting the on the 1st of April, the taxation of the what we call Tajir Dost. Sana, I always say that sometimes Pakistan, when when we are pushed to the corner, we tend to do things, and that's not a good strategy. Though we
Yeah.
had promised the IMF that in January 2024 we would launch this scheme. It has taken us another 2 3 months, and the fact that IMF probably would not take our case to the board till we start the scheme on the 1st of April. But anyway, so sometimes I say that till our hand is really forced, we don't do things, but that's how things are. So the government has a tailwind coming in. But having said that, it's still a very sobering picture. And the reason I say it's a sobering picture is that the quantum of challenge that stands in front of them is huge. Today also, I see the numbers on the IMF projections, I see the numbers that we project, and I today saw the numbers on the World Bank projections as well. Just think about it. Last year we had a negative growth. This year, agriculture has behaved well, and what we are now envisaging is a growth near 2%. In the coming years, you know, the World Bank thinks we are not going to cross 3%. IMF thinks we're going to maybe hover 3 to 4%. So even if we take 3% in the coming years, 4 years on the average would not give us a growth more than 2.5%. So this is challenge number one. This is a higher challenge than the inflation challenge. So let me explain why I say that. Approximately 4 million new enter the labor force in Pakistan. If you grow on the average by 2% a year on 4 years, so 2% creates about a million jobs. So what that means is that 3 million every year are looking for a job. So that's a sobering picture by any stretch of imagination. Inflation has started to taper, but also remember that there are two petitions in the field by both being heard by OGRA and NEPRA for electricity tariff rise. So even if we continue on the path of what you call tapering of inflation, and one reason there is tapering is that you always look at data very carefully. That last year March had a very heightened inflation of 35%. So this year March figure kind of has that base effect. Month on month, our inflation CPI has risen by 1.7% and food by 2.2%. The reason I say these things is that at least as policymakers, they must know that this is what the general public faces when they go and buy stuff. I'm hoping that this is the Ramzan effect because people store more, people Eid is coming, so people are storing, there are more remittances. So, I think that is the effect which will taper. But let's also see the effect on the energy prices. Inflation international has tapered as far as the dollar is concerned, but there is another concern today. I just tweeted a while ago, Brent hovering around $84 has gone up near 88 to $89. Couple of reasons: Middle East tensions. The US and China have had a good manufacturing data, so people think there is demand. So, this is the overall global picture in which, as you have rightly said, the government not only has to tackle all these immediate issues, which are fiscal consolidation has become a must. So the budget for me now has kind of taken as much importance as the IMF engagement has, because
Right.
the last thing I can say, so the budget estimates for this year are now again 7.5% to 8% on the fiscal deficit, and that's why I think it's become very important.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Saab, for that answer. Let you help us unpack a statement that came from Prime Minister recently, and that was regarding macroeconomic stabilization. And he said that stabilization should not be at the cost of growth. And that is something very intriguing because we know, thanks to SIFC, and the government's own initiative, the government of Pakistan is actually actively reaching out to various companies, and companies are also reaching out. Recently, we saw that #1 seller of Amazon called Utopia also presented its case to the Prime Minister. Do you think that there is a chance to balance both and to ensure that it does not actually, the stabilization does not come at the cost of growth, especially when you have kept the interest rate this high?
So I think macro stabilization forms the basis of moving into growth, right? And so, the PM is not wrong in saying so. So what is macro stability that Pakistan is seeing? It's seeing that we have a current account that we can finance, and we can also finance it because we have the fund program, but also it's come down to, $1 billion. Let's say I mean, the estimates are we end up 0.7% or 0.8% of the GDP. So our current account should be, very comfortable for Pakistan. So that sets, good growth kind of, picture in the sense that we can now import. We have the dollars, the reserves have gone up. So that also helps. When the inflation tapers, so that would become the key for the policy rate. I think the core inflation is now substantively down. Unfortunately, in the last few years, we did this amendment where we have tied the inflation CPI in terms of the monetary policy rate. I think that needs to be actually changed. To be honest, I don't know why State Bank went that way. It was, I think, when the new act came, so core inflation is now down substantively, and on core we are 2% positive on the real rate. So if we are positive there, the 29th April meeting should actually see a reduction in the monetary policy rate. We should see monetary policy easing there,
How
100,
much?
200 basis point. Uh,
Okay.
I mean, it's also always difficult, but we should see 100 to 200 BPS accommodative behavior. I think we've done enough to curtail the private sector demand. We should be now looking at that. So that kind of sets the stage as we move on. Even the next year's figures are now hovering around 15 to 17% on the average inflation as the base effect comes in. I hope we remain comfortable on the supply side. So, whereas it is always, if you look at the inflation, you tighten the monetary policy, you cut the private sector demand. But the structuralist economists think that the supply side has a lot to do with it. So if we consider both the factors, I hope the demand has been curtailed on the private sector. Fiscal would present a better picture in the next budget. And on the supply side, we would be able to ensure that food supplies stay comfortable so that there are no aberrations in prices. And the major pass throughs on the energy are behind us, and hopefully efficiencies come in. And the next pass throughs, which mainly happen on the 1st of July, are not that steep as we have seen in the past. So all in all, that should pave the way for monetary easing as we move into the next 6 months.
Yeah, Dr. Hakan, thanks for mentioning energy as well, because if we talk about the energy losses and the demand is so high in Pakistan, but at the same time, if we talk about production lines, Pakistan, if it wants to of course increase its production for the export, of course it has to increase its energy demands as well. It has to meet the energy demands. And when we talk about the energy crisis, very recently, of course, we have seen that Pak-Iran gas pipeline, which is to ensure that we are meeting our energy demands, it is facing hurdles in terms of if we talk about America has reservations on it. So these kind of reservations on Pakistan's energy demands, can we say that they are pivotal? If Pakistan can overcome this, of course it can benefit Pakistan to put Pakistan back on track in terms of Pakistan's economy. But if America keeps on pressurizing Pakistan on this. Where do we stand?
And could you also address the line losses issue that was mentioned at the start?
So, energy is probably the hardest area to tackle. I even put it now above the taxation bit because on the taxation, I think still levers are there, and we've shown that once we make the effort, whether it's the FPR or on the provincial level, we can move forward. On the energy, where we stand is a very difficult picture, and the way I explain this difficulty is when General Musharraf left government, we had 100 billion rupees in circular debt. When PPP left government, we had about 500 billion. PMLN came in, we cleared 480 out of that because I was present to help clear that. But when
At
PMLN
the very
left,
start. At the
at the
very
very
start,
start,
sir. Yeah, yeah.
the
Please
very,
go ahead.
they had just come in and we cleared it in May 2013, and then but still, Pitafi Saab, you'd be surprised when PMLN left, it was 1100 billion rupees. When PTI left, it was nearly 2300 billion rupees. When PDM or the caretakers and everyone, and now it's hovering around 26 to 2700 billion rupees. So let's first be honest with each other that energy has become such a severe issue that over the past decade and a half, none of the governments have been able to solve this issue. Now, there is a further complication that has arisen. When I was still with the government in 2020, 2019, we had an issue of gas arrears, and they were coming up because we were diverting LNG, which we shouldn't have been doing, to domestic sector and charging the domestic very low, but the LNG prices had risen, so the differential was creating a circular debt. Now, in government, it's not easy to get to figures or to come up with exact figures. So, and then I left, and after a few years, I hear the caretaker team to tell us that 2100 billion rupees in gas circular debt or gas payable simply has come up. And then there is another late payment surcharge. What happens is, Pitafi Saab, if Sui company sends you a bill and you don't pay, then there is an LPS, every one of us. That is another 700-800 billion. So the total there is another 2900, 2700 on the electricity. We are now looking at a circular debt which is around 5700 billion rupees. Now, this is serious stuff. This is $20 billion. So this is the seriousness of the issue, Faisal, the issue that you have put. Now let's look at what is going on. So we used to write this book, and the first time I wrote the book in 2010, 11, 12 data on the SOEs, there were 22 power companies that were run by the government, DISCOs, GENCOs, and everyone else. Today there are 22 power companies that are run by the state. 7 out of the 10 most loss-making units in Pakistan are all DISCOs. Now, this is sobering.
It is.
So what do we do? Now, wherever I talk, and I'm humble in saying this, I always say, let's do reform, let's do some cure. Energy sector, now I'm very, very clear. I use this word in Urdu, it's tanzeem-e-nau. Till we recraft the energy sector, operations, regulations, and policy, I don't think 3 years from today there will be something that I can tell you which is a better story. And the reason is that on the operation side, there is no other issue left but to move on to privatization, and that's not easy. The reason is that many of these discos, for example, have serious issues. I remember sitting with many privatization chairmen. We would go to sell ISCO. ISCO has been on, and FESCO both, I think, have been on the list of privatization for over 2 decades. So we go and find out that the land is not in the name of FESCO. The land is owned by one of the Punjab governments because it was a government thing, the government disco. So no one. So there are real issues, but you have to move to clean them up. So that's the first. The Gencos may be easy to sell. Nandipur coal plants, LNG power plants. So maybe, and there is money there also. So I think SIFC can start work on that rather quickly because the encumbrances there, the loans there may be easier to sort out. Then you go on the subsidies issue. This year the power department has asked for 1,250 billion rupees in subsidy. I don't think finance would be able to come up with this kind of money. And the reason I'm just when I look at these numbers, I'm humbled, and I feel that the government would be seriously overwhelmed.
Right.
Then you start look.
Right, go ahead. Finish your thought.
Okay. So, and the other thing is then there is the policy side, the tariff reform that you have to do. So that's another thing. So subsidy reform, tariff reform, the regulatory reform to create markets. So there is so many moving parts in this, and in all these areas, operations, where there are the huge line losses. We start the year, right? This is really humbling for the nation. We have to collect 3,000 billion rupees. 20% of that 3,000 is lost. So we start the year, we know that we are going to lose 600 billion rupees. Now, this is
Right.
simply, a difficult picture.
Absolutely. Dr. Hakan, you mentioned the SIFC, and I want to understand, and we'll also explore the role the SIFC has played over the past year or so, but particularly in terms of what we're talking about, what exactly do you think the SIFC will be able to do in this regard that that previous governments or entities have not been able to do so? What exactly do you think is there in its capacity to do so?
And Dr. Saab, because you gave an example, a number of examples, but FESCO actually stood out because you said that while you were trying to actually sell it off, at that time their own property was not theirs. So it actually brings us to how privatization design is going to move ahead. Can you address what will be the role of privatization commission or ministry in that, and what will be the role of SIFC?
So let's talk. So on the SIFC, so if we talk, in a sense of, think how this SIFC role has evolved, right? So SIFC kind of started with the fact that BOI was not doing its job as it should have. And I think part of that failure came because, as you talked about privatization, so we created these two entities, Privatization Commission and BOI. These were independent bodies. We could get a chairperson from the outside, someone really smart, someone really who could, come and, be a salesperson for Pakistan, clean up the regulatory framework. But today, where we stand, we are very low on the ease of doing business. Yesterday, someone from BOI actually in a conference told me that they had 1,500 kind of regulations that they were looking at, and still not moved much that the businesses face. So that's where we stood. So BOI came in because FDI was, something we wanted to do. And honestly, I think the reason all this happened to begin with, His Royal Highness from Saudi Arabia, when he came to Pakistan to set up refinery, he came back and said, we send these letters, we send these emails, we don't get a reply. We still haven't moved on the refinery. This was 2019. I remember being on the table when these discussions were happening. So SIFC came in that, FDI, let's try and push through things. But I think then they realized that the whole of government approach was needed to move the inertia in the system. So then we came up by institutionalizing SIFC. And when we did that, I think we did something which is needed to be done anyway, which is that we said the decisions of SIFC will not be challenged in NAP. That kind of helps send a lot of decisions to SIFC once they are approved on that forum. Then the divisions, the departments, the government agencies know that they are comfortable, so they move ahead. So we've moved ahead on a number of areas. PIA is one example, right? PIA's privatization has been in the doldrums. It is the same thing that we wanted to do in 2016, Pitafi Saab. And, the then PC chairman has also spoken about it, so now I can say it in public. Bifurcation, we had set up a company, and I remember setting up this company because it was set up actually in my office, PIA2, which is now called PIA Holding. It's the same program because there is no new program. It's just to do it. So SIFC is kind of pushed on that. Another initiative, I think SIFC, so one whole of government approach, so many decisions are coming through because you can do that, and where there is a push needed, they help. We've gotten these, so agriculture is their forte because there is another organization, LIMS, the Land Information Management System, helping them. So we've gotten these buffaloes from South America. So to try and improve, the yields in Pakistan, to try and move on the agriculture side. I think there is a consistent engagement with the foreign missions that we have. So try and to push them. So a lot of SIFC role, I think, has emerged in terms of pushing things where they are not happening, having an implementation role, and then of course it's the continuity. Whatever was being done in PIA is now continuing, because the SIFC is kind of a, I don't want to use the word guarantor. You can maybe find a facilitator is a better word, to move on those things. So I think that's being helped. On the FDI, I think we haven't broken a big ground. But at least the intent has been shown. I think domestically we've also moved on these agriculture farms being handed over to some of the corporates. So there's work that is being done there. So all in all, I think on the privatization front, that's one way of getting FDI. And as I said, the PIA is in the offing, and then others could be. My sense on the privatization and both on BOI has been very clear. As I mentioned, a book that I wrote, I also wrote a book, and it's lying on the website of BOI. And I say, if you do good work in government, it doesn't go waste. So it was a book called Ease of Doing Business in Pakistan, and what could Pakistan do. So I'm really grateful to BOI. It's the first book on their website, and then they've developed 2018, 2020, what could be upgraded in terms of doing those things. So that's good. So I think the next task of SIFC is to push the great deregulation agenda. I'm also hearing that now a deregulation law is being made in Pakistan. So all these things combined, FDI from abroad, then the Recodic deal that we are talking about, interest in mines and minerals, PIA, the agriculture, getting these buffaloes in the country, energizing our foreign missions. So, that itself is a whole lot on the plate. And just showing that intent to the people of Pakistan, that there is a one window. If you send an email, you'll get back an email. I know these things may sound very minor to some people, but sometimes when you work in the government, these things, sometimes I have to find, yeah, someone sent us a letter, where is that letter? These things become, because the kind of what you say, mails is so huge that you lose the important ones at time. So all in all, I think SIFC, and then the most important part is that establishment sits in that. Establishment in Pakistan has been like a cornerstone of continuity. The provinces sit in that. The role of the provinces is extremely important. Health, education, many of the projects that have to be done, railways, they're all with the provinces. The lands that you have to transfer to the FESCO, they are with the provinces. So that's extremely important, that there is one place where it's like a coordinating mechanism, they all sit. My view on the privatization commission and BOI is still a little different from that is being followed. I think you need to bring a chairperson in both these organizations, a guy or a girl who's done these things abroad, who knows how to restructure organizations, because you would need a lot of restructuring if you want to sell these assets on prices that don't raise a finger in Pakistan, or don't raise an eyebrow, or gets us the best value for our family silver, and also ensures that our stake stays with them. On the discourse privatization, Pitafi Saab, the question that you asked, the answer is that there are many mechanisms. You can separate the retail business and the supply business. You can have small city discos and sell them. Lahore itself would be very big. Then the adjoining areas. So many mechanisms there. You don't need to sell 100% share ownership. In PTCL at 26%, we gave management control. We still owners is 74%, right? So there are many ways. Then there are these concession agreements. These are like lease agreements, long-term basis. So you can think about it. So this is the real brainstorming that has to happen at the PC level, at the privatization commission, but very humbly with people who understands not only the energy business and the privatization. As I say, my favorite these days is that there are three parts of running a good government. We have democracy, we have bureaucracy and the establishment. That's the second part, the SIFC there. And then there is a third part, which is called the technocracy, which, in my opinion, in Pakistan is largely outsourced to abroad. The consultants, the banks, the multilaterals. So, eventually we have to think about taking that back in our arena and, empowering, getting good people in these areas would help. On the energy sector, having a local team to do energy sector reform. Because, and I say this, all the multilaterals have been involved in the energy sector reform. And look at where we are. So might as well try something new.
Absolutely, Dr. Saab. Before others ask questions, two quick things. One, a caution, the other one, a query. The caution is regarding the books that you mentioned. Every time you are going to mention one of the books that you have written that has not been mentioned in this program, I am going to anticipate a signed copy. The second thing is regarding the query. Very quickly, regarding FESCO, ISCO that you mentioned, these are entities which are profitable. Am I not right in that?
And Dr. KHAQAN, regarding the role of SIFC, as you mentioned earlier, as I understand, of course, this was a body that was formed with regards to bringing in foreign direct investment, and as you mentioned earlier, has evolved into different areas and different roles. And as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, it seems that we're banking a lot on SIFC to solve the country's economic problems, and it seems that all of the problems dealing with the economic sector is something that we look towards the SIFC or mention the SIFC for. Aren't there other institutions and bodies and governments and ministries already in place, or are they redundant now in light of the SIFC?
So now you ask a question which can possibly be more comfortably answered offline, but I'll do my best to answer it online. So Pitafi Saab, all the books, and there are more work that I've done within the government. The government gave me a great chance to do great work. Very few people from the outside would say this, but I really say this. And we did really great work. And the good thing is that today, even when the World Bank was talking about SOEs, they were quoting our research. And I'm extremely happy. I have the thing open in front of me, and they have part of it they've taken from our research. It's the first time that we are not taking from them, but giving it to them. So I am going to sign all the books and one day drop them at your house. Yes, PESCO and ISCO are very well prepared. They are good discos also. Our ISCO line losses are, very compatible in terms of the international norms. So yes, but then the idea is that do we sell the good discos and keep the bad ones with us? So that balance has to be taken. We always said we'll take one a good one and one bad one, so that this thing doesn't come on us that you only want to sell the good family silver and the bad ones are still with us, so the inefficiencies still remain. So, Pitafi Sahab, I'm glad you asked that question, because that is the balance that you have to strike, right? You also know, and we should talk about it, that whereas PMLN wants to push privatization, SIFC establishment wants to push, but there is a third partner in the coalition, which is the PPP, which is a bit apprehensive. So, you have to make sure that this is so good that it is not challenged in courts. It's done by professionals. The values are right. The restructuring has been done. The right value has been created. PIA share hovering around 3 rupees. Today it's 28 rupees, I think. So you see how value gets created when investors start seeing that something is going to change. Yes, I think one of FESCO is probably more ripe, as it supplies to our industry there. Sana, your question is most important, and it really is at the heart of how we are going to change. It is evident that when I say that we have outsourced our HR, we have outsourced our thinking. Part of it comes from the fact that we have lagged behind in being able to not only recruit good HR from the outside as professionals in energy, in finance, in investment, in privatization, in all these economic areas. But I think there is something, I say, a very simple reform. You want to have good bureaucracy in these areas, right? and I want to. And the very, very simple reform, I know elders have written books on them in Pakistan, but all they need to do is when an officer reaches grade 20, right? Then you ask him or her that is your area social sector? Then keep him in income support, keep him in Batul Mal or her, so you train him in that regard. Let's say an officer like me says, no, my interest is, the economy. Then, put me through privatization, put me through petroleum, put me through finance. So I will then become a good economic expert in terms of being an administrative person. I think this is a simple reform, right? The IMF doesn't have to come and tell us to do this reform. So these are simple new ideas that Pakistan must think about. I know people talk a lot about how our service delivery.
Dr. Saab, sorry to cut you, but you are talking about this important reform, and it is important. We have been talking about the need to reform bureaucracy or restructure it as well. But the problem is we are based on the Westminster model, where bureaucracy has a permanent pool, and there your people keep on shifting. What you are advising is closer to the American system. How do we actually migrate from one to another without creating a massive disruption?
So I'm saying everything stays the same. Their perks and privileges stay the same. Their promotions stay the same. I'm just asking that people show their intent of being more specialized in either energy or economy or social sector or, interprovincial stuff, but so that we can try and keep them in these arenas. That would give them much more exposure. I've spent so much time in finance and energy and privatization that has perfected my knowledge. Similarly, if we were to keep a person, I think at least you can have a broader exposure till grade 20. So that's my proposal. But once you reach that, you're in your 40s. You have still about good 20 years to go. If you then remain within the purview of where you want to settle, then you will have so much domain knowledge. Today, the problem is the lack of domain knowledge. And that's why Sana's question, because the domain knowledge is missing, SIFC or technocracy from the outside is coming and writing those reports of the power sector, of the gas sector, of the privatization. So if you have domain knowledge, when we wrote this book for the first time, so there were 206 SOEs data that we had to. I had to bring in a guy from Citibank. I had to get a guy who had worked in the energy sector. I had to put this team together because it needed domain knowledge. There was certain domain knowledge that I didn't have myself. So I think this word, if you start thinking about it within the bureaucracy, that domain knowledge can be created for them by them spending time there. Someone is from the law, then he probably or she stays in the law department. So what I'm saying is that it's time to start doing small little things which are doable. I don't think big bang reform is possible in Pakistan, given the political environment that we are in. But these small little things, of course, are possible. And in coming years, so SIFC kind of Sana is fulfilling that role. Inertia in a ministry, so they move forward, they help, they ask, they kind of push through and give cover, and the things get pushed. I think that's the whole way.
They might be filling this inertia and this space, but what I'm concerned also is whether this will also sort of, in a way, limit our potential to actually embolden or strengthen our institutions. Do you think that's so?
I mean, that fear is always there, but I think what I understand from my discussions with the folks in Islamabad is that they're cognizant of that fact. And now there is, of course, and I've been the one who's been saying that, and many people ask me that is this really possible? But go back a year and no one was talking about it. That some of the ministries just need to go down to the provinces. So now there is a real talk. PPP picked it up. Now the government has picked it up. The PM has said this a number of times that we need to devolve these, 10, 12, 13, 14, 17, whatever, poverty, climate, all these. And how do we set up a coordinating mechanism? So there is talk about this. So I'm glad you guys have brought this up. Maybe this is a theme that we could also, every time we talk, we bring it up so that we come up with new ideas. There is a dearth in some ministries, and they need to be strengthened, no doubt about it, the ones which we need to keep. For the time being, maybe SIFC, but eventually, Sana, absolutely. Now, that mechanism is still not clear because there is no formal mechanism to do this. People like me have, very short tenures, and I think that doesn't help. But though I have had a very long tenure because I kind of settled in well, but usually the people come in 2 to 3 years and then they get unsettled and leave. So because there is no core group of the professionals there, so people find it hard maybe. Though I have always said government is a great place to work because look at the canvas. It's huge, and there is so much to be done. So these are things that we have to start talking about, and improvement in terms of service delivery, and then what functions will be played by federal, provincial, and local government. I think that's Pakistan's future.
Dr. Hakan, I still remember once you were talking in one of the seminars, and I attended that seminar, in which, of course, you highlighted the importance of rocks and crops, but at the same time, you actually put forward the innovative ideas of improving the economy related to, of course, selling the ideas. And when we talk about the selling the ideas, of course, it has a lot to do with the IT sector and emerging technologies. And looking at Pakistan's potential to export ideas, we have a lot. But there are certain hurdles which are still being faced by population at large when it comes to, of course, not being monetized. There are different channels which are not being monetized within Pakistan. I know quite a few journalists who want to actually, share their content and sell their content. But of course, the different, channels which they want to go through, they are not monetized in Pakistan. Still, there are hurdles within the IT sector. That is why, Pakistani talent is not being able to sell their talents, content. Yeah. And of course, they have to rely upon somebody sitting in the West or somebody sitting in the Middle East to do their work there, and they get monetized there and they get paid there rather than in Pakistan. Wouldn't it be so beautiful that if Pakistan can, waive off all of these hurdles so that money is directly coming to Pakistan? It would be a sort of, investment which is coming to Pakistan on a very micro level. People at large would be facilitated by this. At the same time, that money would be becoming part of our economy.
And Dr. Saab, this is a very interesting question because it actually brings me to ask about IP protection in Pakistan. It seems that there is hardly any IP laws which are available to the common man who can go and then seek protection on intellectual property. So how to streamline then that also? But you cannot possibly just say this on television and expect me not to ask a counter question. When you said that government is a great place to work with or work in, let me ask you, is it a competitive employer as well?
So sometimes you ask the difficult questions, which are best answered offline. So let me answer the easy one. So Faisal, I am still proud that, I wrote in the government lots of things. The Rocks and Crops is an article that I wrote about Pakistan on 15th of December 2022. So it was before it became, now it's a fashion that rocks are, I've always said, because I feel very, very strongly. And the reason I wrote Rocks and Crops is because I always say there is a lot of difference between my training and the men and women who 99% are foreign trained. I am an Australian trained economist. Most people that you have here are from the West, from the US. So the difference here is that Australian economy is almost similar to Pakistan economy, almost similar. Now, they had these privatization issues. They are digging rocks and crops. So I learned this working with the Australian government, right? BHP, Rio Tinto, they are the biggest, developers and sellers of mines and minerals in the world. When I saw the studies on Pakistan, so I've been very excited. I know many people don't think this is easily doable. I agree, but just imagine in 2028, when the first Reko coal starts to flow out of Pakistan, even if it's or $2 billion, that'll be the start. And then the gold that we have, the TTM belt, I think it's called. I've been very excited, and I still believe for generations to come, this is something that we must do. That doesn't mean that we don't need to do all the other fiscal reforms that we talked about, but this is something that we need to develop. We can't do it. It has to be BHP, Rio Tinto, Barrick, or whatever. So I learned this in Australia operationally, and I have talked about it here a lot. Crops, one of the best yields in the world, one of the best livestock in the world is again Australian. It's an agrarian based economy, which is a first world economy. Pakistan's exactly very, very similar. It's just that our cotton yield is 1/4 of China's, so we are suffering, or it's less than 20% of Australia, so we are suffering. If we were to pick up 2-3 major crops, get our cropping pattern right, Pakistan exports $5 billion and imports $10 billion of agri and food, right? Just reverse this equation. Let's say were exporting 10 billion and your import fell by 5 billion. That 10 billion alone would solve your current account issue. I don't ever use these words, Asian tiger, we are going to fly, or whatever these things. But the only low-hanging fruit you have in the next 3 years, and trust me, I've read most reports on Pakistan, is agriculture. If you can do a good job on wheat, if you can do a good job on cotton, if you can do a good job on rice, if you do these crops right, you improve their yields, Pakistan would start looking much more comfortable. On the IT sector, again, I don't know how much time you have left. There is a story, and I can tell you that story next time. In terms of money, government is not a good employer. It was hard to even live off what one earns if one wants to live comfortably. So that's another thing government has to start thinking about, how to pay people for who and what they bring on the table, not across the board the same thing. So these are the real issues that we have to grapple with.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Dr. KHAQAN, for joining us and being a part of the discussion as always. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you very much for being part of the debate. Thank you, Farrukh. Thank you, Faisal. That's all that we have from the show. We'll now see you tomorrow.